Greetings from my kitchen. This is a happy place for me. Most of the good things one can imagine tend to either start or occur in a kitchen. When we did the Advent videos, I was in the dining room and the lighting was challenging, and I found out that the lighting is better from our kitchen, which suits me fine because I'm only a couple of feet away from food and refrigerator and pantry and all kind of good stuff. As I said, this is a happy place. But Lent itself is not something you would describe by use of the word happy. People sometimes say to you, Happy Lent, and you begin to think theologically that the response ought to be, not really. Lent is not a happy time. It's not a happy season. Lent is a season of pathos and passion and sacrifice, culminating in the cross. So I want to do a few devotionals with you as we move toward Easter, having to do with characters in the Lenten story that have a tragic aspect, whose stories could have wound up much different than they did. And we're going to begin with Judas. Judas was a trusted disciple. Judas was a friend. Judas was someone in whom Jesus at one time had confidence. Jesus was not naive about money. He made Judas the treasurer of the group, meaning at some point in time there was trust, there was belief, there was confidence. Even at the Last Supper, Judas dipped his bread in the dish with Jesus. The person who did that, traditionally, the one who dipped his bread in the dish with the host, was the guest of honor. Even in the garden, when Judas betrayed Jesus, Jesus said, "Friend, do what you are here to do." The Judas story could have turned out differently. In fact, two different Gospels tell the story differently. In Matthew, Judas is portrayed as a zealot who probably didn't intend to betray Jesus to death, but rather intended to inspire Jesus, to manipulate Jesus perhaps, to force Jesus' hand to do what Judas believed he could do. After all, in Matthew's Gospel, Judas betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. That's the equivalent of $12. You can't live with Jesus. You can't be in a relationship with him. You can't be called by him. You can't observe his miracles and listen to his teachings and ultimately sell him to death for $12. Anyway, after it became clear that Jesus was not going to call down legions of angels to defeat the Romans and Herod's troops, Judas realized, hey, wait, I made a mistake. Judas goes back to the leaders of the temple. He takes back those 30 pieces of silver and throws them down and says, the man's innocent. I have betrayed an innocent human. You can't do this. And then he goes out and hangs himself. Matthew portrays Judas as someone who ultimately believed that Jesus was the Messiah and was probably frustrated as a zealot that Jesus seemed to be wasting so much time with ones and twos, some children here, a leper there, a paralytic here, when he should be not only storming the temple, but storming the city halls and establishing the kingdom. In any event, Judas made the wrong choice, perhaps for the right reason, according to Matthew. But then, if you read Luke, that's not the case at all. In Luke, there's no 30 pieces of silver equivalent of $12. In Luke, he says that Judas got a lot of money, and he did it for the money. And he did not repent having done it, and he did not repay the money, and he did not go out and commit suicide as he did at the end of Matthew. Rather, Judas made a decision. I may follow Jesus, I may know Jesus. There may have been a time when I loved Jesus. Jesus is important to me, but not as much as money, not as much material things, not as much as the power and the consequence that will be mine as a result of wealth. And sometimes isn't that the choice we make? Ultimately, Jesus or stuff, Jesus or power. Jesus or material goods, Jesus or status, Jesus or our politics, Jesus or what we project to the world and our levels of comfort, according to Luke, not Matthew, but Luke. That's the decision Judas made. The one thing for sure is this: Judas could have been an inspiring person who wrote an inspiring story. As it turns out, he was and remains a symbol of absolute tragedy. John Maxwell said, "Every choice you make makes you." Eleanor Roosevelt said much the same thing. We are the result of the choices that we make. Judas made the wrong choice. Ultimately, in everybody's life, there comes a moment when we have to decide between Jesus and something, whatever that something is. Anytime we choose something instead of Jesus, we make the wrong choice. And that choice ultimately makes us. It's one of the lessons of Lent.